So yeah, thanks so much for having me here. Yeah, my name is Monica Granados. I'm the director of Open Science. I'm in Canada, up in Ottawa. There'll be no ducks in my talk, but there will be some Daphnia later on. I'm an ecologist by training, and when I was doing ecology, I really was confronted by the way that we were trained to disseminate our research outputs. And so, what I do is like I have the opportunity to come in and give these types of talks um, so that folks who are working on really important research, like avian influenza, have the tools to be able to disseminate their work as far as wide as possible, transcending borders, transcending language barriers. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how open licensing facilitates that. So this is what I was confronted with when I was doing research back in the 2010s. Really, I was still using paper to write down my data. I was doing some studies on fish ecology, and that is one type of research output that's not easily backed up, so not great as a researcher myself. In fact, I even had friends who lost years of their thesis when their computer was stolen. Um, and I also realized that the way that I was incentivized to publish in some of these journals meant that others couldn't read the work that I was publishing, even within certain academic institutions. So unless you're, a large library, you may not have a subscription to some of the more specialized ecological journals. This is just two examples of research outputs where we're incentivized to not necessarily make this output as accessible as possible. And so you're probably, though, familiar with many of the open access efforts to make these types of research outputs more accessible. There's many ways in which you can make your publication open access and also at no cost. There's increasingly more and more mandates like the ones from NIH. They're even sort of now exploring putting caps on paying for article processing charges. But the open access movement has many different ways in which you can still make your work open. That includes employing preprints, so versions of the manuscript that have not finished the peer review process, but often are very similar to the version of record, or that's what the official sort of journal version on the website looks like. There's many mechanisms to leverage what we call green open access. So that's using, again, the exact same language that's in your final published version and putting that into an institutional repository, like the one that Yale has, and making that accessible. There's also now different ways in which tools that will map the version that's in the repository or in a preprint server to the version of record so that even if someone hits a paywall at the journal website, they can be linked to the free version using sort of these like browser extensions and such. And there's this growing adoption too of diamond open access. So that would be publishing in a traditional journal, but it's both free to publish and free to read. The diamond open access journals get their funding through private foundations, through national governments. There's also other models like the one called Subscribe to Open, which means if enough institutions that have the funds to pay for a subscription fee, it opens it up for the rest of the world. So there's a lot of different ways out there in which you can make your work open access, especially now that there's more and more funder mandates that are requiring it, but you don't have to necessarily pay the article processing charge to meet the mandate. There's also lots of data repositories that can save you from having your data be all in one place and make it accessible to others. I know that you folks, have great practices in the lab to share your data. Just wanted to point out a neat tool from the R3 data where you actually can look at discipline specific repositories using this tool where you actually can explore and go down sub disciplines using that tool. So we know that there's many venues and tools out there to make your work open, but making it accessible and physically accessible and often at no charge is one thing. Open licensing allows the research to fulfill its potential. And that's really what I want to talk to you about, the role of open licensing in helping your research output reach its potential to reach the most audiences. The Creative Commons has created a suite of licenses that allow creators to choose how their work is to be shared. But what is Creative Commons? So Creative Commons, where I work, is a U.S. nonprofit that stewards the licenses that help people share their creative works around the world. So we provide technical, legal, and policy solutions to enable the sharing of education, culture, science, all in the public interest. And it's not just research outputs. We work in both culture and education, and we see our licenses used on a lot of different types of creation. So, for example, like the Arduino hardware uses CC licenses. This is a picture of the girl with the pearl earring that is on Wikipedia. So everything on Wikipedia uses CC licenses. It either uses a CC BY or CCSA license, um, because it enables sharing downstream, and we're going to talk about that. Even the board game Cards Against Humanity is CC licensed. So you actually can go on their website, download the full board game, make your own cards because the license allows you to remix and reuse. So before we go into the licenses, I want to sort of get a foundation of copyright and intellectual property because I didn't get an ounce of that when I was in grad school, which is pretty wild given that you often are giving away your intellectual property when you are signing copyright agreements and publishing agreements with publishers. But here's the like quick and dirty copyright 101. So it's the area of law that determines how others can access or use original works. So all of you are creators. You're all either creating figures or graphs or manuscripts. Those are all creations. You have the copyright to those creations in most cases, unless there's something in like your contractual language with your employer that hands over the copyright automatically to them. But that being the exception, whether that's in your work life or outside of your work life, you write something down on a piece of paper, the copyright is yours. It grants a set of exclusive rights. So the idea of copyright is to protect the creator so that they can make money from their creation. It's rights to works that are original. So it has to be a sort of a new creation. um, it does not protect facts or ideas. So if I go outside here and count the number of trees that are in my front lawn, and that is not a copyrightable figure. If I draw a picture of the trees, that is copyrightable. But facts or ideas are not copyrightable. It's automatic. So as soon as I draw that picture of the trees, that is my copyright. And that's something that I really want folks to understand because often you'll think, oh, I have to apply for copyright. Not in the United States, not in most places around the world. The copyright is automatic. It also lasts a long time. That can be good and bad. It often is overused by large companies to protect uh, ideas or creations uh, to move into the public domain. And so, we've seen the extension of copyright. I think it's now 70 years plus the death of the author in the United States. I think it's the same in Canada. It takes a long time before copyright expires and it moves into the public domain. It also can be transferred. So often that is what you do when you write a publishing agreement with a journal. You transfer over the copyright unless you retain your rights, and that's still a bit of an exception in this space. So if you are the copyright holder, what Creative Commons does is gives you a set of tools to be able to allow others to use your copyrighted work in ways that you would like. It's it's a way to move from a binary of of all rights reserved copyright to public domain. It fills in that middle ground. It gives you the power to allow others to use your creations, like your figures, like the photographs of your study species, like your manuscripts, like your preprints. So a brief overview of the license is that we have four conditions. When you combine them, you move on a spectrum from the least permissive to the most permissive, or least open to most open. So what you generally probably see in the research space is a CC BY license. So a CC BY license means that you require attribution. That's pretty in line with the norms of sharing of science. Um, you want to get a citation or an attribution for your work. So if others are using your work, they have to attribute the new derivative work to you. We also have provisions for a non-commercial condition. So if you don't want your work to be used for non-commercial purposes, also a share alike, meaning that if someone makes a derivative work, it has to have the exact same license terms. And then there's also the condition to add an ND or no derivatives, meaning that they can't make any changes to it. The more conditions you add, the less permissive it is, and sort of also the less open it is. This is why we often recommend the CC BY license for most research. Of course, there's always exceptions to that rule, especially if you're working with sensitive data. But generally, we recommend the CC BY license because it allows the most types of downstream uses. So you can do more things with the original work with a CC BY license. So here's an example. Here's the Daphnia that I was telling you about. I studied Daphnia for a bit when I was in grad school. I loved making comics, and so I made a little comic about Daphnia waking up with their epiphia. And so the copyright is mine. I didn't have to apply for it. It's my copyright because I created this comic. That means that I can add a license to this comic to allow others to adapt it, to remix it, to reuse it. So if I add a CC BY license to it, you can change part of the comic and even translate it. And that's one of the major reasons why we recommend a CC BY license. It allows translations. So, here it's been translated, that panel has been translated to Spanish. If you put a very restrictive license like a CC BY and C&D license, you do restrict what you're able to do with it. You can only have the exact same panel, but you could display it in different places because it still has a CC license on it. And so there are so many different places in which you will probably find these licenses and can use these licenses. As I mentioned, we recommend the CC BY license. Of course, there are exceptions. That's part of what the Listen Principles paper was about. For most of these, the general research outputs like preprints and publications, we're going to recommend a CC BY license so that it can be translated, so it can be used to make videos or different types of outputs. For data, we usually recommend like a CC0 public domain dedication or a CC BY license on it, again, depending on sort of the conditions. And also on your images, often other researchers are looking for images of a study species. If you add a CC BY license to your images, other researchers can use those images for their presentations, for their research. This goes for other sort of smaller outputs like figures or graphs. They also can have CC licenses on them, allowing others to remix and reuse them and have those outputs have a greater reach and further reach. So at Creative Commons, what we do is we take these licenses and help others adopt these licenses. So I want to just do a really brief overview of what we do in my program, the Open Science program. We've been doing some work on open climate data, so getting large data holders like the Group on Earth Observation, the World Meteorological Association, the UN to adopt CC0 or CC BY licenses for their data so that others, including researchers, can take that data and use it more readily and not have to go and ask permission for the data if it's not sensitive data, if it's data that should be reused or can be easily reused. We also have a program that we just wrapped up where we are working directly with preprint servers to make it easier to choose CC licenses for preprints. So we've worked on resources so that explain why we recommend a CC BY license, and we've also sort of made changes directly on the preprint servers so that it's easier to select a CC license and also explain what the CC license does. Like, what does that allow the downstream user to do when I apply a CC license to my work? And we also do policy work. So, uh, open open access has a lot of different components, and we go in to explain why a policy, whether that's like a national policy or a funder policy like NIH's policy, should have open licensing as a component, why we recommend certain licenses for certain types of outputs. And so we work directly with national governments, funders to help them write policies. And the last bit that I'm moving into working is this new CC Signals project. So all of the licenses that I've spoken to you about today for the last almost 25 years have worked really well in the absence of AI. And that's because there is an incentive, especially in the research community, to contribute to the commons because you get that attribution, because it potentially means you can start a new collaboration with a new colleague because you get that the citation. There's a reciprocity built into the commons. With the advent of AI, we're stripping away that fundamental reciprocity that was built into the commons. AI is coming in, scraping data, and then all of those like attribution, metadata information, it gets stripped away so that when these types of GPT, large language models, you ask it a question, it does not tell you where that answer came from. And even when it does, it's a very high level link. And that's assuming that it's going to give you an answer that's actually sensical. So what we're working on is addressing this question of what's going to happen to the commons if researchers, educators no longer want to put their work into the commons or make it open if AI is going to come and take their work without giving anything back. And so we're working on this a new way for stewards of large collections, and that's sort of where we're starting to indicate how machines should contribute back to the commons. And so the first sort of piece that we're really working on is ensuring a mechanism for large collections to indicate that they want to retain the attribution or the citation, so that if your piece of data is in this large repository, that it's linked back to the it's linked back to that data set, so that the attribution isn't lost. We have three other signals, so around direct and ecosystem contribution, and also around the model being opened. But the first pieces that we're going to be working on is this attribution piece, because we recognize, especially in the research community, how important attribution or citation is, and we're worried that the amount of of content and knowledge that's in the open is going to shrink because there is a concern that it's going to be at best ineffectively used by AI and at worst uh, sort of reduce the rationale for putting things out in the open. I always like to finish with my favorite Captain Planet quote: "The power is yours." There's so many different tools out there to make your work open. That is also the conceit of the licenses. It's a spectrum of licenses to give you, the creator, a way to choose how you want your work to be shared, and empower you to do that. I'll just leave quickly with my contact information. And at Creative Commons, yeah, we have a lot of training opportunities, and we have office hours as well if you have more questions about the licenses. Happy to take some before the top of the hour.